Hey everybody, Brandon here. Welcome back to a new video. Today we're going to be covering tournament number 8. This is going to be a 7-round tournament, but before I get started, in the last video, I actually forgot to show you the rating graph for completing that tournament. Now, you can see it on the screen, and that is my new rating. It only went up like 4 points. It wasn't a huge improvement. However, any improvement is an improvement, so that's it's always nice. Now we're getting into the 7-round tournament. Okay, and what is happening here is I'm playing with the black pieces versus Gary. And Gary was someone I knew previous to this game and actually helped propel my chess understanding and was, yeah, just a great person to work with. So, okay, now we are going to get into the game. This is our first official game. I'm pretty sure every practice game we ever played against each other, I always lost, so this was a big deal for me. I definitely tried my best here. So let's see how the game goes. C4 and E5. So what's going to happen here is normally you see E4 and then C5. This is a bit more common, and that is a Sicilian. So this is essentially a reversed Sicilian. G3, knight to F6, bishop to G2, and D5. D5 isn't amazing, but it's an okay move. The whole point is, if I'm trying to play a position like this, we're essentially playing a dragon, but white is up a tempo here. Takes, and now we see a not so great move from my opponent, B3. The problem with B3 is that even though it looks like a logical move, you're trying to put your bishop on the best diagonal possible. It actually might not be that great of a diagonal, because surprisingly, black always has these ideas of f6 in the position, and f6 defends the e-pawn and creates a chain. And if you have fianchettoed one bishop and you're fianchettoing the other, it's harder to put pawns in the center because you're always going to be blocking one of those bishops. So that's one reason why b3 after g3 isn't so great. And another reason why is because when you think of positions where you're playing the Sicilian, you rarely play moves like b6 because you don't really need to support c5, because c5 was played on the first move, and c5, the whole point is if you're playing b6, it's usually to support c5. Otherwise, you should really move the bishop onto the other diagonal. So this isn't really the greatest piece on the long diagonal, surprisingly, and it creates weaknesses in this area. But okay, let's continue. C5. So I'm just playing this like a Maroczy. Maroczys were definitely my favorite positions to play against the dragon, because you get a lot of space and you just focus on restriction, and they're just really enjoyable positions. They're very complex and it's very easy to mess them up, but there were positions I was very comfortable playing. So now we see bishop to b2, knight to c6, knight to c3, bishop to e6. I don't want to move my knight because that's admitting something here, but bishop to e6 just develops and supports the piece that they developed and attacked. So this is what makes the most sense. Rook to c1, and now I make a silly move here, b6. So essentially what they did and I said wasn't great, I'm doing as well. b6 just weakens this diagonal, and now you can see this bishop looks amazing. Although it might not be immediately useful, it's a very scary piece to look at. b6 makes a lot of sense. However, instead of b6, bishop to e7 would have been better, followed by a possible rook to c8, and then if I really want to, then b6 in the future. However, it's just not timed correctly here, just because this diagonal currently is not so great. Although there aren't, again, any immediate tactics, it's just something you don't want to allow. Now we see d3 from white, and I played bishop to e7. I'm ready to get ready to castle and everything like this. Another move might have been rook c8, just because this pin kind of scares me. So it's not really something that I want to stay in the middle of, but okay, knight to f3, f6. I just want to protect this pawn as much as possible. This does allow some knight h4s, but in reality, knight h4 I can still castle probably, and everything's still okay. So the thing is, castling, there's actually a good chance of knight f5 here, which is surprising, and you get the bishop. The whole point is if you take, then there is bishop takes, and uh-oh, that's not good. We are down a piece. So even though it looks like we're winning a piece after knight f5, we're not. So that is one concern there. But that actually is another reason why rook c8 is just a little bit better. And we now see the downsides of b6. But okay, castles, castles. They didn't see knight h4, and now that knight h4 doesn't quite work the same, because after knight h4 we should be able to play something like rook c8, where after knight f5 we can take it, bishop takes, and king h8. And they just traded off one of their pieces for one of mine, but they wasted 2 moves to do that, knight f3 to h4. So I would say that if anything, black got an advantage out of that, but that's really up to you guys to decide. Okay, anyways, so after castles we see a3. Now we know exactly what my opponent is going for. Now this b3 and a3 is actually very common when you're playing the Sicilian. It's called the hedgehog. What you'll want to do is you'll want to play rook c2, queen to a1, and the thing is, the bishop on g7 or g2 is actually a little misplaced if you're playing a move like a3. And that's another thing you have to think about is normally you'll want your bishop on, for example, c2, and then you play e3, and then you play d4, and often you sacrifice, and these 2 bishops are looking directly at the king. But the bishop on g2 isn't really looking at our king, so it's not as much of a concern. Anyways, I play rook c8 because I'm kind of sick of this pin now. I think I finally realized, yeah, I should probably get out of it. So good choice by me. Knight to d2. I think this was offering trades. I didn't think it was necessary to trade here, just because it just kind of wastes time. So instead, if they want to trade, I want them to take, because they're the ones with less space, and normally when you're playing against someone with less space, you want to give them the options to take, or even restrict those options and let them stumble because they have less space. But what I ended up doing is just a6, another restrictive move covering b5. Though it might allow some knight a4s, it actually isn't a concern now because the queen and the knight are covering b6. So that is a good point to notice. Now we see knight c4, and I did see this in advance, because if I didn't see this in advance, then this is a little scary, because there might be ideas of taking on d5 now. Where, for example, if I play a silly move like h6, takes, they actually can give up their bishop, and knight takes b6, and they're actually winning an exchange. And this is a very, very bad position for me, because they took a pawn and an exchange. It's fair to say I'm losing this game. But okay, I did not allow this. I took on c3. This was the whole idea. Where after bishop takes or rook takes, I was planning a move similar to b5. Knight takes, bishop takes, and b5. Now kicking the piece away. This is a very scary move, because you are weakening the c5 pawn, and you're putting it in direct attack to the rook on b1. However, after this, knight d2, I did have some ideas here. So I played queen d7 immediately, just in case if I wanted to trade, but it's also connecting my rooks. It's just a natural move. But I'm also preparing a special move here. Bishop to b2, now starting to target the pawn. And here's my idea, knight to d4. The whole point is I'm trying to target this pawn as much as possible, and I'm also looking at the e2 pawn. Now, it's not so great to play e3 here, because after knight c6, now the d3 pawn is weak. So this isn't really an option, and although I'm not directly attacking the pawn right now, I'm sufficiently defending c5, both with the bishop and the rook, and you have to be very careful, and it's hard to move here as white. So it almost feels forced to take on d4, but the whole point is after c takes d4, I have a lot more space, and things feel a lot more comfortable for me. So after this, I took back, and b4, rook takes c1, and rook c8 to get the open file. After queen b2, I decided to play rook c3. I'm not too sure why. I think the whole point is I was hoping for something like this, but in reality this wasn't so great. Instead, the move rook to c7 would have been better. Or after rook c1, queen to c8, and we get the open file. However, that doesn't change much from what happened in the game, except they get an extra tempo. Rook c3, knight e4, rook c7, rook to c1, and queen c8. So all that really happened here is I gave them a free move, and obviously that's not something you want to do, because especially when you have a long time to think, you want to maximize everything in your position. However, takes, and f4. But before we get into f4, we should look at this position because it's nearly an endgame now. There's not too many pieces left on the board. There's two minor pieces for both and the queens for both. And we need to evaluate this position. Black has more space. Black has the bishop pair. But white has a very solid position in that they don't have too many advanced pawns, so there's not really any weaknesses. So there are some double-edged features to this position. It just matters what matters more. Does the bishop pair matter more, or will my extra space prove to be an overextension and become weak in the future? So f4 is doing exactly that. It's trying to prove that my pawns are overextended. However, this does lose material for white, so I don't really think it would be the best. The thing is, if I were to just immediately take, I think queen takes even, followed by pawn takes and like knight takes or something, could be interesting, as it is equal material and they have some space to gain with with e4, queen e3, and d4 moves like this. However, this isn't what happened. Instead, what happened here was f5, and all of a sudden there's a bit of a problem here for white. Knight g4, or knight g5, sorry, doesn't quite work because after takes, I have this beautiful center. I have a move like queen c3, and it's really hard to actually do anything here as white because I am just threatening to promote if you take, so you can't take. And otherwise, I have moves like queen d2, and I pick up the pawn, or if I play queen d2 and you play h4, you just have more weaknesses. And this is undoubtedly better for black. And also, you're just winning the a3 pawn. That's another feature, because there's no way to protect this pawn here. But okay. Knight to f2, and I should have just played queen to c3 here. Queen to c3 is a very strong move, and you have to play queen to b1 again, because these two squares, or these four squares that cover the a3 pawn are all defended. So they would not be able to go there. But instead, I played queen takes. I took on f4 because I saw that this was simply winning a pawn. Queen takes, pawn takes, and queen takes g3. And this looks pretty good for me because I'm up a pawn. I have the bishop pair. I have to have a huge advantage here. I wouldn't say it's winning yet, but it's close to winning. We're circling around their king. There's no pawns in front of their king, only pieces. This feels very, very good. So, okay, queen to a7, bishop to h4. Just a simple idea of wanting to actually take and go into an endgame where we are just up a clean pawn and we can just push these pawns because these are two protected pawns, two protected pass pawns rather. Queen to a8. Oh, my apologies. Queen to a8, king to f7. Queen to b7, king to g6, and queen to f3. So they're going for a trade now. Now, what do you do here as black? So I was originally saying I wanted to go for a trade, and I decided to actually trade here. And I think this is the right choice, because although we're in an endgame and we're only up a pawn and they have two minor pieces, the thing is I have the two bishops, and this is a very open position, and the most important feature is that there's pawns on both sides of the board. So the problem with that for white is that since there are pawns on both sides of the board, we can switch from one side to the other, and only one of their pieces can defend on both sides with just one move. Whereas the knight, for example, if it's on h1 trying to get to the h-file, let's see how many moves it takes. h1 to f2 to d1 to c3 to a2. 1, 2, 3, 4. It takes 4 moves to get to the other side of the board, whereas the bishop can go from one square to the next in one. So now we can kind of see why a bishop is better than a knight. The only downside of a bishop is it can only cover one square, one type of square rather. Whereas the knight can cover any type of square. However, that's not the important part of the position. The important part of the position is we can attack on both sides of the board. However, it wasn't too necessary here. That is just a general rule that you should think of when you have the bishop pair versus any knights. Bishop to c8. Now, this is just a prophylactic move. I don't want to see bishop b7. I don't want to allow them any chances here. So I thought that since I have a pawn, there's not really too much of a rush, and all I should do is just protect my potential weaknesses and then start restricting them. d4 now. And I thought bishop g5 would be a good move because the whole point is I want to go bishop to e3. And bishop to f6 immediately wouldn't be as good because maybe there'd be an e3, bishop g5, and like a knight to d1 where they can start protecting. So I thought this this maneuver bishop g5 would be just a little bit stronger, where if knight to d1 now, then we can go bishop to c1 and we're attacking a3. So there was some ideas here. So instead, my opponent just blundered the d4 pawn, and I played bishop e3 check, king g2, and I took the pawn. Now we're 2 pawns up, we have the bishop pair, and we should reasonably convert this now. King g3, king g5, bishop c6, h5, a4, so they're trying to trade pawns, which is a good idea, because if they can trade off every pawn and then sacrifice, say, their knight for 2 of the pawns, then 1 bishop versus 2 bishops is just a draw. So that is a good way to think here, as if they just trade off all the minor pieces. It's just a king and pawn ending. We're up 2 pawns. That's very easy to convert. B takes a4, bishop takes a4, and h4 check. Now I'm trying to push my pawn mass. King g2, king to g4, bishop to d1, and bishop b7 check. It's important to note that this doesn't really work, even though it looks like it does, because after we move, the king is pinned, or the pawn is pinned, and they're not able to trade off more pawns here. So that's why they just moved their king. Now bishop to e3, so I'm just trying to restrict this bishop here. Knight to e5, check. King g5, and knight to c4, attacking my bishop, trying to make things annoying, and they're doing a good job of that. King to f4. The whole point is, if they were to take, then I'm okay with this because, well, at the very least, I'm also winning this pawn, but it's not even like they're able to win any of my pawns as well, because I can protect it with g5 and same color bishop. This is also a very easy conversion if you know your endgames. So king f4, knight to d6, bishop to e4. Now the bishop to e4 I'm not actually too much of a fan of. Bishop to e4 makes sense because in this type of position, it should be winning, but it's not something you should just openly allow. And the whole reason why it's winning is because, for example, if we just go into a position like this, g5, and say bishop to b1 or something, even if we really need to, just bishop b6, bishop c2, bishop b1, bishop back. The whole point is when we get a position like this, we can defend the pawn, and they can't reasonably attack the bishop because we can always move away and then move back when they waste another 2 moves. We'll be able to likely win this pawn. However, there's also bishop d3 ideas. So it's just a very tricky position because, okay, even if we go back here, check, bishop d3, bishop here, takes. Maybe this is easy to win. Maybe it's not. I would say it's not so easy to win just because this is the opposite color corner. But there's also another feature. It's opposite color bishops. And even if we can win this pawn, I'm not too happy with my chances here to convert. Just because it's a lot more difficult to convert that type of position than just playing a move like bishop to c6, where we're just preventing any b5s, the trades of more pawns, and we still have our bishop pair, and we're ready to play g5, g4. So I think this is a lot better way to play here, just not allowing knight takes e4. However, my opponent did not take on e4. They played bishop to b3. I think they just didn't want to trade minor pieces, but I think that was probably their best bet. Bishop to d2, b5, and now we trade the a and b pawns. King g4, knight d6, and bishop to f4 check. And now we're winning quite easily here because we just won the knight. After bishop d1, I play king g3 and my opponent resigned, as it's just going to be roughly a mate in 4. There's ideas of bishop to g2 next, and then followed by bishop to c5, and that will be checkmate. So it's just checkmate. So anyways, that was a very interesting game, and it really highlights the power of the bishops, where the bishops seem to be controlling not only the knight but the other bishop for the entire game. I would say if we were to take anything away from this game, the biggest lessons are to, if we just go all the way back, all the way here, playing b3 in these types of positions isn't so great, and also playing b6 isn't so great. And another thing, if we go even further, all the way down, the other thing here is make sure you look for every move possible, even if it looks like a silly move, because moves like queen c3, sometimes your opponent can't trade with you, and try to see if you can offer trades where they can't, and then they have to just go backwards. Because in this type of position, when you play queen c3, it looks like it's just offering a trade, but it's doing much more than that. Because also, I would like to say knight d1 is queen to e1, but okay, that's just my mind going crazy right now. So it's important to look for moves where you can offer trade, but it's actually better for you. So trades are very important in chess, and if you can slowly improve your position by letting your opponent trade with you, they're using their time to trade with you, and that's a good thing, because if you're using their time to improve your position, that's exactly what you want, because now you're trying to improve your position, they're trying to improve their position. But if you're tricking them into improving your position, then that's where your advantage can come from. But okay, that's a whole thing. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in game number 2. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you then.